Today, I'm going to be sharing 3 stories involving hikers that sound like total BS when you first hear them, but are actually 100% true. From one of the most miraculous rescues you've ever heard of, to a few hikers who made some questionable choices with technology in the backcountry, I think these stories will warm your heart, maybe scare you a bit, and even make you cringe. So with that said, let's head over to one of the most beautiful places in the entire world, the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. Now, I'm taking you there for free, but you must hit the subscribe button to cover your admission, especially if you're a repeat viewer. We're shooting for 1 million subscribers on this channel. We've got a long ways to go, I'll admit, and I think hitting the subscribe button in exchange for all this free content is a pretty fair deal. In October of 2022, an anonymous female in her 20s decided to go for a hike on the Colorado Trail. She was from northern New Mexico, not terribly far from the Deer Park area outside of Silverton, Colorado, where her hike was to take place. Because her identity has remained anonymous, I'm not sure what her hiking experience was or even what her specific plans for this hike were. I do, however, know that she was only planning on being out for a day hike. Unfortunately, though, this is not what would happen, as this hiker would end up spending multiple nights alone in the Colorado wilderness with no warm overnight gear. Folks, there's plenty of lessons that we can learn from this story I'm about to tell you, and the rest of the stories in this video for that matter. And so I'm going to be highlighting these lessons as we go along, and it's also for that reason that I'd like to thank Exter for making this video and therefore these lessons possible in the first place. That's right, Exter is the sponsor of this video. They're a new sponsor. I'm so excited to have them because they make some of the coolest wallets and everyday carry gear that you've ever seen. So this right here is the Parliament wallet. This wallet and all of Exter's wallets include built-in RFID blocking technology, which if you're not familiar with that, you know how you can just like tap your card when you go to the register to pay for things nowadays? Well, criminals can take advantage of that technology to steal your money and your data even through a process called skimming. Exter's wallets block these skimming attacks, and they also don't stop there. If you're somebody like me, who unfortunately loses their wallet frequently, you need to check out Exter's tracking card. This thing right here, it pairs with your phone so you can either produce a ringing sound to help you find your wallet or track it on a map. Oh yeah, and one of my favorite parts about their wallets is this. That's right, at the click of a button, you can access up to 12 of your cards, and it's still got other space for things like cash and just other things like that as well. Folks, this is the time to try Exter's wallets as well because they just started their anniversary sale, which is gonna get you up to 20% off. And if you click the link at the top of the description and use my code HIKING, you're gonna get an additional 5% off. That's up to 25% off total, so you don't want to wait. Click that link, use code HIKING, and you'll also be doing this channel a massive, massive favor in the process because awesome sponsors like Exter keep this channel going. And with that said, let's get back to the story. So this anonymous woman is day hiking down the Colorado Trail, and at some point during her hike, she ended up straying away from the trail and ended up near the bank of the Animas River. Now, it's unclear to me if she purposely left the trail or if it was an accident and she kind of got turned around or something. And the circumstances of what happened next is also unclear to me. One thing I've come to realize since I started covering all these stories for my channel is that very often specific details will vary between different news reports, but regardless of that, I know for a fact that while this hiker was off trail near the river, she fell off a cliff and she fell hard. The reason for her fall is what's unclear to me. Some articles stated it was because she was trying to take pictures, but then another article made it seem like she was trying to get back to the trail when she fell. So I'm not exactly sure why she fell, but I do know that she did indeed fall off a cliff face. Then she tumbled a bit, and then she fell almost 100 feet or 30 meters. Somehow, this woman survived the fall. But despite this, she was still in a lot of trouble, obviously. She had broken her leg and suffered a concussion, and she was now severely immobilized. Hiking herself out of the rough Colorado terrain was basically 100% impossible, and so at this point, unless somebody found her or spotted her, she was completely and utterly screwed. Once again, this woman had no warm overnight gear with her, and the Colorado mountains just so happened to be experiencing a cold spell during her ordeal. In a desperate effort to survive, the woman crawled, not walked, but crawled over to a nearby cliff face and sort of burrowed herself in as best she could. After all, this was her only chance at getting some shelter given the circumstances. And it must have worked at least a little bit, because she somehow survived for 2 nights like this, though she did apparently go in and out of consciousness at times, and she was definitely becoming severely dehydrated. So obviously this woman was in an extremely dangerous situation, and though she was eventually reported missing, she still had not been located by the late morning of her 3rd day. But this woman was not giving up, and it just so happens that the area she was stranded in presented a unique opportunity for her to be spotted. On the other side of the Animas River from where she was stranded was a set of train tracks for the Durango-Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad. My understanding is that this is a scenic railroad most frequently used by tourists, which meant that those passing through the area from the train would be looking out the windows. The stranded woman managed to crawl herself over to the bank of the river to a spot where she could potentially be spotted from those on the passing trains. When a train went by, she would desperately wave, and this bold strategy would end up being her salvation. So this is crazy. Just before noon on the 3rd day of her ordeal, a passenger on the train just so happened to see the lost woman waving to the train from the opposite side of the river. One of the most miraculous parts of this story is that apparently the woman was only visible from like a very specific angle at a very specific point on the railroad. The passenger just so happened to look at the exact right spot during the exact right time and noticed the woman, and then alerted the train crew. The crew then alerted the inspection motor car that was following behind the train. The driver of this inspection car stopped and then made verbal contact with the woman, learning that she was immobilized. They were still on opposite sides of the river, but they were able to communicate, and so the driver waited there while proper help and medical professionals were contacted, and eventually 2 individuals from another train, one of whom I guess was a paramedic from the Durango Fire Department, made their way across the dangerous and cold river to assist the stranded woman. It was eventually decided that her condition was extreme enough to warrant an air evacuation, and throughout the afternoon, search and rescue members worked to make this happen. She was eventually brought to the hospital and thankfully survived. My understanding is that Silverton Medical Rescue was one of the primary organizations involved in the rescue of this woman. Now, I'm not affiliated with them at all. They don't even know I'm making this video or anything, but I did make a donation to them, and I encourage you to do the same. I'm really trying to give back to these search and rescue organizations in my videos now, and so I've linked their website in the description. So I think the biggest lesson from this story is that you definitely should not rely on dumb luck to save your life. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad that it did save this woman's life, and she certainly was resourceful enough to take advantage of the fact that the railroad was there, but I mean, it was luck. It was a miracle that the woman just so happened to be near the train tracks, and it was even more of a miracle that she was spotted from one of the passing trains. If she had been in a more remote area, it's very likely that she would have died. This could have been prevented if she had carried a satellite GPS device with an SOS button. She definitely could have used something like this to call for help as soon as she was immobilized. She also could have used that or a GPS app on her phone, or even a paper map to find her way back to the Colorado Trail before she even fell and became injured. So yeah, it's a miracle that this woman survived. And the hiker in our next story also experienced a miracle after finding himself in a life or death situation due to his cell phone. Just north of Vancouver, Canada, there exists a mountain called Mount Frome. It's part of the North Shore Range, and my understanding is that it's most popular among mountain bikers. There are a number of bike trails on the mountain, but there is also a few hiking trails as well. The main trail to the summit approaches from the south of the mountain. There is no trail to the summit of Mount Frome from the north. But if I had told you that even just a few months ago, you might not have believed me if you checked Google Maps first. For whatever reason, I'm not exactly sure why, to be honest, Google Maps showed a hiking trail leading to the summit of Mount Frome from the north side of the mountain, starting near the Kennedy Falls area. And therefore, in November of 2023, an ill-prepared, again, anonymous hiker set out to hike this non-existent trail. And he certainly did his best. I'm not even sure how the hell he made it as far as he did, but one thing is for sure. He eventually found himself at a standstill, trapped on a cliff, unable to continue in any direction any further without risking death. And so at this point, the hiker called for help, and the North Shore Rescue Team, a local search and rescue organization from that area, sprung into action. And the situation sounded awfully familiar to them. And that's because the exact same thing had happened just over a month earlier. In September of 2023, a hiker called 911 stating that he was, quote, stuck on a cliff on the backside of Mount Frome. He also stated that he was hanging on for his life and was unsure how much longer he could hold on for. I mean, damn. North Shore Rescue and Talon helicopters quickly responded, and wearing night vision goggles, since it was dark by this point, they were able to identify the location where the man was stuck. He had been shining a light from his phone, which assisted them in locating him from the sky. The helicopter carefully lowered down two rescuers, who then had to use harnesses and climbing ropes, that's how steep this terrain is, to reach the stranded man. Eventually, they were able to get everybody into the helicopter and off to safety. And as if that wasn't already crazy enough, North Shore Rescue stated that the exact cliff they had made this rescue on was the site where a hiker had fallen to his death 2 years earlier. Now, they don't believe that the deceased hiker was using Google Maps, but they did note that the September rescue was likely the result of the hiker trying to follow this non-existent trail, just like the more recent rescue from November. The rescuers and pilots I'm talking about here are obviously extremely skilled, and thank God for that, because if they didn't exist, the north side of Mount Frome would probably have 2 additional fatalities in its records. Going back to the November rescue, this particular hiker was apparently very ill-equipped for a trip into the backcountry. He apparently had very little gear with him, he didn't have the right footwear, and perhaps worst of all, he didn't have a headlamp or a flashlight. If you take anything away from this video, it's that you should always have a headlamp with you anytime you're in the backcountry. I know you have a flashlight on your phone, but you can't rely on that. Always, always, always have a headlamp, even if you're only planning on being out for a few hours. The rescuers couldn't identify the exact location of the man, and so they took their best guess, and they lowered a team down onto the dangerous slope of the mountain to start searching. And by some miracle, they were able to navigate through the terrain on a roped belay system, I guess, and they found him. They located the man. They helped him into a harness, and they helped him up into the helicopter, and everyone was safely extracted just moments before cloud cover apparently would have made it impossible for them to do so. I still don't know why this fake trail existed on Google Maps, but my understanding is that it has since been removed and that signs have been installed in the area warning potential hikers to stay the hell away. Apparently, there have been other reports of fake trails popping up on Google Maps. And so let me just say that under no circumstance should you ever rely on Google Maps for backcountry navigation. Even hiking specific apps like AllTrails are often wrong, and so you always need to do your due diligence when picking a hiking route. You gotta cross-reference it between multiple sources, and ideally you should be carrying a paper map in addition to a legitimate GPS app like Far Out, Gaia, CalTopo, apps like that. I've linked North Shore Rescue's website in the description if you're interested in checking them out or making a donation. So clearly this hiker's cell phone nearly ended up killing him, but in our next story, a hiker's cell phone almost saved him. Almost. In late October 2021, yet another anonymous hiker ran into trouble on Mount Elbert. Mount Elbert is the tallest mountain in the state of Colorado, and it's also the tallest mountain in all of the Rocky Mountains. But despite its height, apparently the trails up Mount Elbert don't require any climbing, specialized gear, or technical skills. But of course, that definitely does not mean that it's an easy hike. Depending on the route that you take, you're looking at thousands of feet in elevation gain, sustained periods of time spent at altitude, and of course, potential weather hazards. In October, it's not even uncommon for the higher elevations to already have some snow accumulation, which was the case in 2021. Around 8 p.m. on October 18th, rescuers were informed that a hiker on Mount Elbert was overdue. A team was immediately dispatched to search the area, but by 3 a.m. the following morning, they still had not located the missing hiker, and they needed to take a break. During the search period, numerous calls were made to the hiker's cell phone, but these calls went unanswered. Rescuers assumed that this could have been due to lack of service, or maybe the phone was broken. But with that said, it's definitely not uncommon for cell connections to go through when somebody is high in the mountains, and so it was definitely worth a shot. Searchers resumed their efforts around 7 a.m., but at 9:30, they were informed that this lost hiker had somehow made it back to their car and all the way back to their place of lodging. Apparently, the hiker had gotten lost off the trail just around sunset, and they wandered around in the dark all night trying to relocate the trail. They did find it eventually, and then they navigated around among a few different trails until they finally reached the trailhead where their car was parked roughly 24 hours after they had started their hike. So, given all those details, this seems like a pretty straightforward scenario, maybe even an insignificant one, given how quickly it was resolved and given that the hiker was completely fine. There is one important detail, however, that makes this story fascinating, perhaps even a bit frustrating. So after this hiker made it back to safety, rescuers learned that the hiker had in fact received search and rescue's calls on their cell phone, but had chosen to ignore them because they didn't recognize the number. This hiker apparently figured that the calls were coming from spam callers. Now, I don't normally make jokes in these more serious videos, but I don't know, given the hiker was okay and nothing tragic ended up happening here, I do think it's kind of funny to imagine this lost hiker like stumbling around in the pitch black in the wilderness, like probably pretty scared and frustrated, only to see some spam calls pop up on their cell phone, which then just like pisses them off even further. I don't know. I'm not trying to be insensitive, and I'm certainly glad this hiker was okay. And one thing I will say is that before you rush to criticize this hiker in the comments, I do think that it's important to note that the hiker themselves did not call for search and rescue. It was somebody else at home that called, and so this hiker didn't know that anybody was out looking for them. Obviously, they were lost in the woods at night. They were probably a little panicked, and so while the cell phone thing is a bit humorous and frustrating in hindsight, I don't know, I think we can all understand how it happened. And so, I don't know, please just show this particular hiker and the other hikers I talked about today some grace. Lake County Search and Rescue was responsible for this search, and so I will also have their page linked in the description. And once again, I encourage you to make a donation, and I encourage you to support all these search and rescue organizations I talk about. The work that they do is incredibly difficult, dangerous, and all the groups that I call out in my videos are volunteers. And with that said, once again, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Double check to make sure you're subscribed if you think you already have. And I'll see everybody next week.